Hello and welcome to the Exeter Impact Podcast, where we host engaging conversations with research experts, sharing their insights, approaches and solutions for advancing impact of research at the University of Exeter and beyond. Our episodes cover diverse flagship research across academic departments and impact types. Tune in every month to learn about planning and embedding research impact and opportunities to develop your impact portfolio. The podcast is developed and hosted by me, Emma Sheriff, an Impact Evidence and Evaluation Officer at the University. Episodes are made available for staff to listen or watch via the Impact Community of Practice SharePoint site and linked in the Exeter Weekly Bulletin. Welcome, Sam. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I wanted to start by talking about why you became interested in human performance learning. So your research is absolutely fascinating. Can you give us some background to the work and how you became interested in this area?
My PhD was essentially in sports psychology. So we were interested in sort of psychophysiological determinants of performers in sport. So explanations for why people perform really well, why they master skills and kind of become experts. Explanations, though, also for why they might go wrong, break down, choke under pressure in demanding situations. So I researched a range of different kind of psychophysiological things that might explain what it is that's going wrong in situations when we're trying to be good at performing something and we don't. We mess up, we make mistakes, we choke under pressure. Most of those psychophysiological measurements or metrics were taken from eye tracking technology, worn on the head, electromyography on muscles of the arms and the legs, and some electrocardiography in terms of measuring the heart. So what we were trying to do is understand, what it is that goes on in the mind and the brain that then leads to the performer either performing well or performing badly. And obviously the natural progression of that was to think about training and learning, to how you kind of acquire skills at an early stage and what impact the way you acquire those skills has on your ability to perform them when it matters. Sure. So we tested we read about and understood lots of theories that explain why learning skills one way might lead you to be robust under pressure and be able to master the skill and perform well when it matters, but also why learning skills another way might actually set you up for failure and lead you to a performance breakdown kind of later on. So I studied a concept called the quiet eye, which is a sort of visual attentional measurement of expert performance. And I tried to look at ways in which we could understand how experts use the quiet eye to perform well, and convert that into training interventions that we could give to novices to pick up skills quickly and to learn them quickly. So that my PhD was in sport essentially, but it very quickly moved into lots of other fields where humans are also having to perform, fields where humans are also trying to learn skills. And that's what took me into the fields of surgery and aviation and the military, and into businesses and industry in which training people to be as good as they can be is the currency. Trying to help workforce get good at something and be good kind of when it matters most, under pressure or when they're at risk or when things are complex. So we were and we are experimental cognitive psychologists, but with a firm mission to apply that stuff to real world problems. So we're applied experimental cognitive psychologists, which isn't particularly catchy, and we've really enjoyed doing that. I think we've contributed, our research has contributed to knowledge and to theory. We've developed some interesting kind of frameworks and tested some really popular theories. But what really I think gets us excited is taking that out into the wild and kind of using it with humans who have these challenges, who want to be good at things and have to perform at their best in order to do their jobs.
You can see how that trajectory of your career has led you to some really impactful research. and certainly the impact on sports and athletics and performance must be really key for you. What are the specific technologies? I'm interested in the preciseness of it. What are the technologies that you apply, and how do you think they add to the kind of underpinning research that you do?
Yeah, so technologies kind of actually feature sort of at both ends of the spectrum of our research in many ways. So, and this is where the phrase, using technology to understand humans, but then using humans to understand technology kind of came from. So in the beginning and still today, we adopt a technology to better understand and give us insights into the human. So eye tracking technology, the kind of body and bodily systems measurements I spoke about earlier, so electromyography and cardiomyography, and also just sort of digital training environments like simulators or virtual reality. These were tools we picked up in order to help us to understand human performance and to test these sort of human performance theories. And they were really useful. They gave us insights. Those technologies gave us insights that we wouldn't be able to get if we didn't have them. So if I'm interested, for example, in how pressure and anxiety affects the performance of a pilot, I need measurement devices that they can wear whilst they're performing the skill of flying the plane. But also I'm not likely to be able to go up into the sky and fly a real plane, so I need a simulator. And so these technologies were really enabling in allowing us to do sort of semi-realistic synthetic research. So creating some of the realism of the real world situation, but doing so in a controlled experimental setting where we could measure things precisely. So eye tracking, virtual reality simulations. But our research soon became it soon flipped, and the research actually became about those technologies. So initially we were using them to help us answer theoretical questions, but very quickly in engaging with the industries that use them and the industries like surgery and aviation and medicine, we were given a ton of questions about those technologies. So do these simulators work? Are they creating realism? Are they helping surgeons to train? Are they helping pilots to be safe? How would you design those technologies to be better than they are now? What role does virtual reality have in the future of learning and training and education? And so very quickly, those what were kind of lab techniques became the focus of the research question. And so now the technology is sort of front and center. We're still using that same technology to measure things about the human when they're in an experiment, but the experiment now is actually about the technology. And this is really what's led us into new areas of impact around working with the companies that develop the devices that we use and the industries that are adopting them, and helping them to adopt them wisely for the right purpose, to have the intended influence on the performance of a person or the training and education of a person. So yeah, quite nice. Sort of the technology bookends our research in many ways, and so lots of the knowledge that we obtained by using these tools in the lab setting really sets us up nicely to be experts in their application in the real world. So that nothing teaches you the mechanics of a piece of technology and the associated software quite like using it in a research project with a 50 participants or whatever. So we learnt lots about how they work, and that's been really powerful in helping industries that use them all the time to do it well.
I imagine that brings you a great sense of achievement too, in being able to help those industries.
Yes, sometimes. It's certainly nice when you see a recommendation or a piece of advice that you've given kind of put into practice, and not always in practice in an official sense, but in terms of policy or in terms of a change of design, but just sometimes in the kind of the collective wisdom or the natural wisdom that a group of people using that technology now have. So if we give advice on or give an opinion on how a piece of simulation technology works or doesn't work, it's nice to see people adopt that and to sort of change the way that they apply that technique to their trainees. So I think we've had quite an unofficial influence on, for example, the way surgical simulators are used, just in terms of how surgeons think about them, what role those technologies now have in the kind of learning curve of a trainee surgeon. That's quite nice.
We're going to move on now to talk a little about your impact goals and your stakeholders. So the research that you've conducted has findings that can benefit both industry and the learner. So what do you consider to be your impact goals to impact those people, and why?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that we, interestingly, I don't think we set out with any impact goals in mind at the beginning of the sort of research program. I think they naturally kind of evolved from the research that we were doing. But I guess how they've been subsequently kind of constructed is around helping trainers, instructors or educators who are trying to teach people to be good at what they do, trying to help them to do the best job they can. And this is a common challenge, right, among a load of really disconnected and supposedly unrelated industries. Teachers in schools, instructors in commercial aviation companies, surgeons in the NHS, military personnel, are all trying to teach other people how to master a skill as quickly and as efficiently as possible, at as low a cost as possible, and to make that person robust against whatever challenges or hurdles they might face. Our research has, I guess, sort of set itself out by accident to help them in that challenge, help them to deliver the right instructions to the trainees, to maybe design the right kind of curriculum and system around a training environment, and obviously to select and use the right technology in the right way to aid them, and also to avoid selecting the wrong technology for the wrong purpose. So interestingly, lots of our research has been about sort of being almost pessimistic about the role that a piece of technology has, and explaining that it probably doesn't do what you think it does. And here is some evidence to explain why that technology might be problematic, even though in the moment that technology looks like it's having a really beneficial effect on a trainee. Here are some reasons why that technology might be limited and why it might create problems kind of further down the line. So for example, if you look at virtual reality technology, at face value, it looks like an exciting, realistic, really usable, widely available, cheap form of skill learning. And it is all of those things. But we haven't yet really explored what happens when a trainee learns a skill from start to finish in those kind of virtual, perceptually weird environments. And so my colleague David Harris is looking really precisely at, well, what are the sort of unintended consequences or the after effects of being in these digital virtual environments for long periods of time, learning a complex skill in that environment, and then being kind of thrown back into the real world and having to perform that skill, in the real world with kind of real physical properties. We've really enjoyed having that sort of that pessimistic, kind of slightly grumpy take on how these technologies might not work as well as how they might work.
That kind of taking the virtual reality aspect and then applying it to the real world, there must be some differences there. And I think it's really interesting that you're tracking that. Very interesting. So in terms of your specific stakeholders, I'm interested in if there were any kind of unexpected, we've talked about some of them, but if there were any unexpected stakeholders that you came across, whether that list grew, what that looked like for you.
Well, I guess the way to explain the unexpected ones is to first talk about the obvious ones that we have worked quite closely with. So in our Ref 2021 impact case study, we had testimonials from coaches in Olympic teams, from surgeons responsible for national training programs, from the CEO of training companies who are developing digital tools. These are the people with the sort of the problem that I've described. They are responsible for making humans as good as they can be, and they're responsible for when they go wrong. What's been quite interesting, so the unexpected, the surprising, I guess, stakeholders has been when this work has been lifted into slightly more kind of clinical or therapeutic applications. So these technologies, the eye tracking, the virtual reality, they are useful in helping patient groups or people with sort of lower level kind of difficulties to receive therapy, to receive solutions to their problems, to receive training, but training that's designed not to necessarily make them a high performer, but actually to function and to be healthy and happy. And that's been really satisfying from a research perspective, to be able to do research that influences those people. But it's also really surprising that these are patient groups, charities associated with patient groups, hospitals are now interested in what we're doing and are therefore stakeholders in where that research goes over the coming years. So we've put a real emphasis in the last couple of years on understanding that ecosystem, the research ecosystem, because we've not been in that space for very long, and some of the methodologies and approaches that are common in that sort of clinical and health related world, but also the ecosystems of those patient groups and those clinicians. An NHS worker who is trying to help a patient to get better is very different to the surgeon responsible for delivering training to trainee surgeons.
Sure.
So we're really trying to understand how we ensure that the impact that research has is right for that kind of group of people. And so lots of really exciting kind of PPI work to hear the patient voice and to understand the challenges that they have, and also just learning the language and the culture and the norms of like those industries of the care delivery side of the NHS, for example. And obviously the merger of our sports science department with the public health research team at the university has been a great opportunity to do that, to learn from colleagues who have much more experience of that than we do.
That's great. I think in my role, supporting the health faculties in the research that they're doing and developing the impact, I can see how that's worked really well, that syncing together of public health and sports sciences. I'm going to move on now to talk about pathways to impact with you and your reflections on that. So I wonder if you could describe for us what the knowledge exchange kind of pathways to impact that you employ, and what's been interesting about them.
I think what's probably most interesting is that until recently, well, and maybe even now, we weren't entirely sure what a pathway to impact was, as opposed to impact itself. So that's been quite an interesting kind of journey. In the early draft of our impact case study for Ref 2021, we were describing what we thought was impact, and we were being told it was a pathway. And so that was, around the level and the extent and the kind of depth of the engagement that we had with an end user. So, the fact that we were designing parts of a training curriculum for a national urology training program, we thought was impact, but it turns out that was a pathway. And the fact that we were doing research directly funded by governing bodies of sport that were interested in implementing the findings of that research. Again, we assumed that was the impact, but it turned out to be the pathway. So yeah, I suppose the most interesting thing is I've only just really learnt that, and that's really opened my eyes to the difference between having the attention of and the engagement with end users and actually influencing the decisions they make and what they do. But that really answers the question. The major the major pathways that we have are helping co-design the training interventions that these industries use, running applied research with them. So our experimental work, our trials are very sort of pragmatic and very embedded, and so they are often the beginning of a journey towards a change in the way that training is delivered. Quite literally, sometimes the trial or the experiment is testing an alternative way of doing the training to develop evidence, and if the evidence is there, it's often adopted. I guess other pathways that we've developed over the years and are exploiting a bit more now is just being a consultant stroke advisor stroke expert on the topic, and kind of just turning up to give an opinion based on your research when it's needed. And I was certainly initially quite sort of shy about doing that, because didn't think for 1 minute that people would really want to know what our view was based on our research down here in Exeter. But people really do, and they really value, our end users really value the kind of rigour and objectivity that we bring to our research, so that the answer that the wisdom we're giving them comes from a decent piece of research, a decent study that can be relied on. So saying yes to those kind of advisory roles, and saying yes to those invitations to turn up to unofficial gatherings of stakeholders, and putting your hand up and kind of sharing your opinion, having your say, has been a really kind of powerful sort of indirect pathway to impact. Generally embedding ourselves in the ecosystem of these industries, and learning the language and the culture and the norms of how they work has been really powerful, and that's what allows us to then describe our research in a way that they understand. So the same research finding about a particular type of training needs to be described really differently to surgeons, as opposed to military trainers and instructors, as opposed to commercial aviation pilots. And so I don't know if it's a pathway or just a technique that we've developed, but we're really good at getting to know those people and speaking their language and describing our research according to their terminology.
Wonderful. And I think that embedding you talk about, we see in a number of our impact case studies where those relationships are forged, and then it becomes kind of a natural progression for you each to consult each other during that process, and to use that co-production element to drive forward more.
Yeah, absolutely. I nearly used the phrase relationship building, but I find it kind of a bit cringy, but I agree. It is about building relationships with individual people who have important roles within these stakeholder communities, and taking the time to develop those relationships well. And obviously with that, and I'll speak about this a bit later perhaps, with that comes the challenge of what happens when they move on, or when they leave that role, or when their funding gets cut, and I think persevering in the face of those things is what's really been quite important for us. Certainly the narrative that's described in an impact case study is not always reflective of the reality of the bumps in the road and the changes of direction. And talking to colleagues about that and explaining that it's not quite as smooth and as rosy as it appears in the final narrative, I think has been really helpful. So,
what impact do you think you can demonstrate that you've achieved for learners in particular with advanced technologies like VR?
When it comes to moving away from describing the pathway to impact and actually explaining the tangible impact, we struggled initially. So we were hearing from people in important positions within these industries that they were hearing our research and doing things with it. We could kind of see and sense that there was a change happening, subtle and quite modest, but a change nonetheless. But we found it hard to quantify that. So we started, at I guess, the sort of most ambitious end of the scale, and asked questions like, well, if we've had an effect on urology training, does that make urologists better? And if they're better, are they safer? If they're safer, are they making less errors? If they're making less errors, are less patients being harmed? And is that something we can measure? And actually, probably not, right? Because our impact is important, but it's probably too subtle and too modest to be able to look at those kind of data and really see anything. So we had to find a way to quantify something between the ultimate outcome and the instructor or the trainer telling us that they'd done something. And that led us into kind of almost efficiency type measurements or efficiency type metrics. So was training quicker? Was training more satisfying for the trainee? Was training experienced by more people because of things that we added to that training? So in the context of urology, we had a real influence by developing some videos which demonstrated some of the findings of our research through eye tracking technology. So we recorded what expert surgeons do when they're skillful and when they're mastering these kind of urology skills, and we showed trainees what novices did that made them susceptible to errors. And those videos were embedded into the National Urology Training event that happens every year. And so we were able to demonstrate that finding, that research had reached a large number of people through the technology and through the videos that came from the technology. And that became one of our kind of indicators of impact. But most of our impact really comes from, or evidence of impact comes from testimonials. So testimonials from the trainers and from the organisations that are responsible for delivering that training. So we one of our I don't know how you describe the recipient of impact receivers was the GB pentathlon team in the lead up to the 2021 Olympics. And they spoke very highly of the work that we did and the impact that our research had on their decision making and their planning and their selection. But again, impossible to quantify in numbers. So we relied on a testimonial from the coach and from the head of performance to spell out in English what it was that our work did to influence the things that they did. And that I think they're powerful. I think that is the best way to articulate the complexity of the impact that you're having. Of course, other research of different types might lend itself more to having a more quantitative measure of that impact, but ours was it was complex, so it required a sort of human response to describe that complexity in clear words.
Sure, and I think that's the significance of the research in one package, isn't it? How meaningful it is to the people that are affected by the impact that you're generating. Thinking about the challenges of accessing or even sharing this commercially related evidence that you're kind of generating, how have you found that, and what has that looked like?
Yeah, it's been hard. So commercial evidence is one particular challenge we've had. So I talked earlier about how our research has influenced the sale of products and the growth of businesses, and we've been quite lucky that our industrial partners have been quite open to sharing that information and quite proud of the relationship between the research and their outcomes. But there have been occasions when that's not been the case, and I'm sure it is for many other academic colleagues who are having that kind of economic impact, let's call it. And that really, again, relates back to the importance of developing a close working relationship with those partners, such that there is trust and longevity, and embedding that kind of transparency in the relationship from the beginning. So, for example, we work closely with some businesses that operate within the defence and security sector. and they have really kind of quite consistent, quite systematic reporting of their own commercial information. They're often public companies, and so they're quite open again to sharing the information that might relate to what we have been helping them with. But one other challenge we have, which is similar but different, is with defence and security, is around the kind of classification of information. And when the user groups or the training environments or the kind of military context is protected in some way or classified in some way, and knowing where the boundaries are in terms of being able to talk about the impact that our research has had. So parts of our impact case study in 2021 were redacted or removed or protected or whatever for that reason, and that's a challenge because when the impact is clear, but and is evidenceable but can't be reported, it's quite frustrating, but completely understandable at the same time. So I don't imagine if we move towards patient groups and a slightly more health focus that we'll have as many challenges there. Maybe I'm being naive, but I'm hopeful that we'll have much cleaner, crisper and more easily obtained markers of impact or evidence of impact in some of those sectors, but we'll see.
Let's hope so. So it's often useful for us to reflect on our approach on achieving and evidencing research impact. What do you wish you'd known at the outset, and what insights do you have for other researchers who are watching or listening?
And it's difficult to say something that won't sound sort of patronising or maybe a bit cheesy, but genuinely, I think understanding that this was going to be and that this is a kind of rocky and complex road would have really helped. I think when I first recognised and understood what impact was, I thought, well, this must be a process that I can put into place, a system that I can build that will just work for me. Tell people what I've done, tell them what I've found, advise them on where that could have an impact, watch them make that change, find some evidence and report back, copy, paste, repeat, and off we go. It was far more complex. It was, and it is more complex. It was often the case that we were having to not just communicate the research, but actually proactively engage with those stakeholders to explain how that research can be implemented and almost champion the change that we think could happen, and perhaps up against some opposition. So very difficult situation when you're telling a subject matter expert that you think your research could change the way they do the thing that they do so well already better, and when you know nothing about that field really. So I think if I'd known that, I would have accepted that complexity a bit more and kind of indulged myself and enjoyed the process. And I certainly am today. I won't say I get excited by, but I am content with and quite enjoy going into a scenario where I have to learn, as I said earlier, new language, new policy, new cultural norms, new structures and ways of working, and try to convince people that they can do what they do quite well already, but do it better in light of thinking about a new thing. So if you take the context of the military, the military and aviation both do simulation really well. Pilots and surgeons and anaesthetists and nurses even are already being trained using simulation, and there's very few industries that do it as well as they do, particularly aviation. But we've been researching technologies that we think can add even more value, and we've been doing research that will advise them on how to make good decisions about what particular technology to use for what particular use case. And so getting into the sort of weeds of that and getting into the kind of murkiness of that is something we're just embracing this time. And I think that would be my piece of advice, if you like, for colleagues thinking about impact for the first time, is to embrace that uncertainty and embrace and enjoy the fun of learning new things, about the industry or the sector or the community of people that you're trying to impact on. And I'm sure people who have successful impact already do that really well.
Absolutely. And I think it is being ready to explore something new while taking the experience that you do have and kind of making it count, really.
Absolutely. And I think it's one thing that's changed in the very short time that I've been doing this job is I think the language around impact and the processes surrounding impact and acceptance that it is a fundamental part of being an academic. That's changed significantly. So I think indulging yourself in say learning new things and new languages and new ways of working is part and parcel of our job, and that helps, I think, because impact, I think, used to feel like an add-on, sort of done in your spare time, if possible. It's critical and it's important and it's fundamentally what we do. That's certainly the mindset that we have in our team now.
Thank you to our listeners and viewers. Exeter staff can access the details of impact workshops and resources from the Impact Evidence and Evaluation team via the episode links for support to plan their impact in readiness for a REF impact case study.